welcome to Planet in the Word, and we are to week 29, and today we're going to go ahead and discuss one of the minor prophets, minor only because he's small, and that is the book of Hosea. Now, Hosea, if you have read the book by Francine Rivers called Redeeming Love, or recently seen the movie, you will know basically the story of Hosea with a little bit of Hollywood licensing going on. Now, Hosea was a northern prophet to the northern kingdoms. Well, what does that mean? Well, after we have Solomon, Solomon's son couldn't hold all the tribes of Israel together. And he was such a jerk that half of the kingdom actually left him. But when they did that, they went into pagan idol worship. And only really 3 tribes remained. We have Judah and Benjamin. They were right there on top of each other in Israel. Those stay together. And remember, within the tribe of Judah, Simeon lived within, and they were eventually absorbed. So what we really have is the northern kingdoms are really about 9 of the 12 tribes. And we have the southern kingdom, which is those 3 remaining. But the northern kingdom, because it went off into Baal worship quicker than Judah, which held on to the temple activities and Yahweh worship longer, God began to send prophets to the northern kingdom. And Hosea was one of those. He was a northern kingdom prophet that spoke to the northern kingdom. And he was really pointing out the things that were going on and the sin in which they were failing. So what's happening here? Well, what we have is Hosea written between about 750 BC and 725 BC. So within that about 25-year window, what we know is that the Assyrian army did invade the northern kingdom in 722 BC. So Hosea's prophecies were very close to the actual fulfillment of what he was warning Israel about. So God does an interesting thing with Hosea. He did this a little bit with some of the prophets, in which he asked them to act out or live out, as an example, the prophecy that they were giving. So what he says to Hosea is, I want you to go marry this woman. Now, there's a little bit of translation ambiguity about what she really was. So at the least, she was very promiscuous. At the most, she was a full-blown prostitute. But the Lord says, I want you to go marry this woman who essentially does not love you back. So he goes and he marries her, and he has 3 children with her. The first one is a son, and they name him Jezreel. Now, Jezreel to the Israelites would have, especially the northern kingdom Israelites, as they were known, would have brought to mind a very bloody time in their history, where Jehu wiped out the reigning king's heirs. Then he has a second child, and this one's a girl. And he names the poor thing the equivalent of the Hebrew words, no mercy, or no compassion. Can you imagine being called to dinner and literally everything spoken over you is no mercy or no compassion? That is your name. And then they go on to have a third child, and again, this is a boy. And this time he names him not my people. And all 3 of these are really God trying to tell Israel how he's feeling about what they're doing. So she ends up leaving Hosea, and God says, as a picture of his relationship with Israel, I want you to go redeem her back. I want you to go buy her back. And he really is trying to show Israel the whole breadth and width of what's going to be happening. So Hosea goes on through the book of Hosea, as you're going to be reading over a 2-day period of time. He spells out what it is Israel's really doing. They're fallen into Baal worship. There's no justice. They're lying. They're taking bribes. They are not walking with Yahweh. It even says, you do not know God, meaning they have no understanding of who Yahweh is and what he is trying to do. So God is going to turn them over to discipline with the hopeful outcome that he is going to be able to redeem them through that process. And that is eventually what happens. But first, Israel has to go through this horrific event in which Hosea spells out some places very specifically and very ugly, even down to the details of the Assyrian army, who was known to be just bloody and horrific, that they were going to rip the babies out of the pregnant women. Now, interestingly, if you go to the British Museum, you can actually see the reliefs that the British Museum has of events in the Assyrian army's conquer and battles of the world, because they mortalize them on the walls in their city, and those actually can be seen in the British Museum, and they are really interesting. But they were a feared army because of how violent that they were. So Hosea says, listen, this is what's coming, and in very short order it did. Now the hope is, at the end of Hosea, God talks about redeeming them and coming back into relationship with them and loving them, and how he is going to one day be able to renew and rejoice in the relationship that they have again. So he always ends, it doesn't always, but I just love so many times God ends the consequences for bad behavior, the discipline, the loss of relationship, with the promise of renewed relationship. And we're going to see this again coming up when we go and talk about Isaiah next week. I hope this gives you an insight and a little bit of perspective to step back and see the breadth and width of what's going on in Hosea. I hope it adds to your reading this week. I hope you get a lot out of it. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good week. See you next time.